The problem with mitochondria is everybody now is really big into taking tons and tons of antioxidants.
The more insulin resistant, the more obese, the more metabolically deranged you are, the less your mitochondria even function.
Who had the lower levels of phosphate may actually have higher Klotho.
Stand if you're on Klotho.
There's a rhythm to this, kind of like epigenetics is kind of sped up so fast, we've advanced so far, but ancestrally we're still on at a different playing field.
FDA just approved SS31.
Taking SS31 almost can help people wherever they're needed.
And it gives you a number and it tells you how much. If your score is high, that means you need a lot of help. If it's low, it means you don't need any. And I scored a big 0, which means my mitochondrial health was phenomenal.
I think we have to change the paradigm how we think about certain medicines.
A lot of simple supplements you can do that will help the mitochondria.
Now we get into some of the more scientific areas, not that exercise and diet and weight training are not, but the area is mitochondria. Now the mitochondria, if you remember high school biology, is they call it the powerhouse of the cell. They're almost like little batteries, and interesting, throughout history, they're almost like borrowed from another organism that entered into the cell, because before the cells had the mitochondria. They're incredible. I think I've even read some new studies where mitochondria might even move to areas like if you have some sort of heart issue or other areas where they're needed, which is quite fascinating as well. So we're just getting to learn more about the power of the mitochondria, but then the mitochondria can also age and also take on zombie-like cells where you need to clean those out, which is called mitophagy. And there are different techniques to how do you reinvigorate your mitochondria, recharge them, because I think a lot of the diseases of aging, they think may be due to the mitochondria running out of battery, running out of power. How do we fix that approach? And I think we want to talk to the panel. I think there's many different ways to possibly do it. There's lots of different substances that touch on the mitochondria. I think Dylan, you support one of the products. I met the owners of that. We can talk about particularly Urolithin A I'm referring to. But there are other substances that are coming out either through clinical studies or in peptides that you see. They start as peptides research and eventually many of them make their way into pharmaceuticals. So why don't we start with Elizabeth and see what your thoughts are on the mitochondria front.
So I'm a big mitochondriac. I think mitochondria are at the forefront of everything. I mean,
You're a mitochondriac?
Yep. If you look at hormones, you guys know where hormones are made? Everybody says testicles, ovaries, they're actually made in your mitochondria. So if you don't have functioning mitochondria, you can't make hormones. Vice versa, hormones come back and signal, like the estrogen has a very big play on mitochondrial function. So when people's hormones drop, you have to replace the hormones and then you have to get functioning mitochondria. I think the problem with mitochondria is everybody now is really big into taking tons and tons of antioxidants. Because when we are producing energy, we make a lot of oxidative free radicals, and everybody's like, I need to take a lot of antioxidants to counteract that. And what we're seeing a lot of now is actually pushing the mitochondria into a low oxidative stress state, which is not a good thing. Our mitochondria to actually get bigger and stronger need oxidative stress. We have to be careful with how many antioxidants we're doing, how we're timing the antioxidants. The mitochondria are in this very delicate balance that we call redox, a reductive and oxidative stress balance. And it's an absolute key to longevity, is to keep that balance perfect. So basically, if you're just pounding your antioxidants, you're taking vitamin C and vitamin E and all these different things all at one time, you're actually doing yourself more harm than good. And I always tell people, you've got to cycle your antioxidants, you have to use them at appropriate timing. Like if you go work out, and then you pound your antioxidants an hour later, you've actually undone a lot of the workout benefits because you need the oxidative stress to build muscle. So I think there's a lot of misnomer there in how we treat the mitochondria. There's a lot of simple supplements you can do that will help the mitochondria. But the problem we're seeing in our world now is that we're in this kind of new world ever since COVID. And COVID actually did a whole lot for all of us, even if you had mild case, did a whole lot of damage to mitochondria. And the mitochondria actually are living in a much more stressed state, and we have to kind of give them a break. So one of the big things that I pull in to help people, everybody, and everybody here who's an athlete can benefit from this, is sometimes we have to give the mitochondria a break by not making them make as much ATP through oxidative phosphorylation. By far, the best way to do that is ketones. So I absolutely love ketones because ketones can make energy without having to use as much energy. So we make ATP in a whole different route, not having to use oxidative phosphorylation. So one of the things I would encourage all you guys to give your mitochondria a little time to heal and get healthy, especially if you're working out a lot, is to use exogenous ketones. Now, a ketotic diet will get you there, but exogenous ketones can actually benefit you even more. So I could talk all day on ketones, but I'm going to throw that in because I think it's a lot of things people don't talk about here, is that we can give our mitochondria a rest, let them recover by using ketones appropriately timed to our training and used throughout the day. And there's some really good ketones out there now that actually are designed to keep you in a sort of low-grade state of ketosis all the time. So we can talk more about that later. There's a lot of people on this panel, but I wanted to throw that in just because I know what a lot of these guys are going to say, and I wanted to throw that piece in.
That's great. I think to bring up peptides, you can go in and there's like all these different classes of mitochondrial peptides. I want to talk about one that's really cool, and it's called SS31. I like to think, if you work of like mental models, SS31 almost acts like a hardware remodel to your mitochondria. And when people ask me what it does, like everyone's like, hey, you got a peptide for that. Okay, what does this one do? It's actually kind of hard to, other than saying like it remodels your mitochondria, it's kind of hard to quantify. Maybe you're going to lose fat a little bit better, but it kind of gives you what you need. If you look at things like red light, what do we know that's doing? It's improving mitochondrial health. I've just seen in practice taking SS31 almost can help people wherever they're needed. And one thing that I'm sure we're going to talk about is GLP-1s. And I think if you look at more of the mainstream stuff, it's like blasting GLP-1. So like taking GLP-1s and escalating the doses. And if we look at metabolic health and weight loss and longevity as kind of this comprehensive approach, mitochondrial health is a staple of that. And I think when we talk about like using GLP-1s, so many people escalate doses, but we could use low doses for longer periods of time if our hormones are dialed in and if we're rotating mitochondrial peptides. So I really like SS31. The more I've read on it and seen people use it in practice, the more I'm kind of like, man, this just seems to do everything. But if you think about it, like we were talking about, mitochondria have this almost innate intelligence in the body to like regulate energy and do all the things that we need in the body. So I think if we look at using SS31, it's been used in people with mitochondrial myopathy and people with like really severe diseases. But if you use it at a low dose, I think like 8 to 12 weeks out of the year, you can stand a lot to benefit. And to Elizabeth's points about the oxidation, is helping scavenge free radicals. So people that are in a state where maybe they have way too much oxidative stress is helping wind some of that back. So that's just my take. I think a lot of people, whether it's someone that has severe chronic disease or someone that is like on the tip of the spear, doing everything right, like everything dialed in, SS31 is something that you can use in your protocol, whether it's 8, 12, 16 weeks out of the year, rotated 1 or 2 times to really benefit. And there's tons of other ones too, and I'm sure everyone will talk about that, but that just comes to mind.
I want to just add, Hunter, because SS31, when we're talking about this mitochondrial damage, the problem with what happens to mitochondria as we get older, and if we've been sick or stressed, is at the inner membrane, which should look like a flower, gets misshapen. And so it can't make this electron gradient to make ATP. So people are doing all these things to rev up ATP, but they don't have a functional mitochondria to do that, and they're actually creating more oxidative stress. So it's actually at the paramount. One of the first things I do for everybody to get mitochondrial health is start with SS31 and ketones, because that allows me to reshape the mitochondria, rebuild them, so that now I can rev them up. You can't rev up a mitochondria that's damaged, and that's why SS31 is such a key.
I love saying too that like people, if you have a dilapidated house and you get the nicest TV and the nicest couch,
exactly.
You still have a rundown house with a hole in the wall and the AC's broken and everything. And so until you fix those things, kind of the foundational things, and SS31 helps do that, it's gonna like lead in the direction of people doing all those things and then not getting the results.
And getting more damage.
Exactly, yeah.
So great answers from both. Actually, I bet you that no one in this room, with the exception of a couple of people up here, even know that the FDA just approved SS31 in the last week. So it's an amazing peptide. They literally, as Jeff Cohen said to us yesterday, if they can change an isomer on the peptide, they're going to try to patent it. Yeah. So he says, imagine how many more of them they're going to attempt to patent. But there's a lot to say about mitochondrial health. As Elizabeth said, our hormones are made in our mitochondria. The more insulin resistant, the more obese, the more metabolically deranged you are, the less your mitochondria even function, okay? So again, if it goes back to what I originally said about the leaner you are, the longer you will live, there's lots of ways to optimize your mitochondria. You know, there's other peptides, you know, that they didn't mention, like MOTC, like 5-amino, both the oral and the injectable. You know, there's plenty of other stuff. There's NAD+. There's obviously the small molecules. There's SLU PP-332. You know, there's various other products. There's ATX-318. There's all these different small molecules now that will help to engage your mitochondria, ramp your mitochondria. But as Elizabeth said, it's also important to, you know, rotate/cycle to protect your mitochondria or to repair your mitochondria. So you kind of like have to look at, if you're going to do things to optimize your mitochondria, you have to kind of go in phases, right? Hunter mentioned red light. I mean, medical grade red light, which very few people have access to, sadly. Most of the red light devices that are in the market are absolute bunk. I'm sure most of you guys have panels in your house that are worthless that you don't know because you're buying them from low-grade Chinese suppliers and manufacturers. But if you actually have access to red light that is medical grade and near infrared, it's incredible to rev and supercharge your mitochondria. Also, oxygenation and ozone are also amazing for you know, upregulating your mitochondria. So there's a lot of ways to actually look at doing your mitochondria, but I would look at it from a standpoint of like, you should have phases in the year where you're really ramping them. Obviously, you can use peptides, you can use sloop, you can use medical grade red light, you can get in a hyperbaric chamber, you can get into a Bimini hydrotherapy tub. There's a lot of ways to do it, but then you also have to look at the backside. And the backside is like when I'm coming down off of ramping my mitochondria, I also want to repair my mitochondria. And my company may be making a product that will actually be the greatest product ever in repairing your mitochondria that's coming. And so again, there's a lot of different supplements. You guys mentioned Urolithin A, there's pomegranate. There's a lot of different things that you can use that are synergistic to repair your mitochondria. But I think if you're gonna work on optimizing your mitochondria, you also have to have a phase or a cycle where you're gonna repair it at the same time.
Well said, Jay. So also there's, you know, the good old-fashioned coenzyme Q10 and ubiquinol as part of that. But there's also, I think, Elizabeth, I've seen you mention postings on NAD and how you can go to whether it's exogenous NAD, and that's a whole nother area that's really, really bizarre to me because people are actually taking NAD, it's not even being approved, and you don't know where it's coming from. But then there's the precursors to NAD, which is NR and NMN as well. So I don't know, these are all different options, but again, you can overdo too much on the NAD pathway as well. So this is a lot. I mean, it's almost for someone who's watching would think, well, where do I even start? Do I take a little bit of this and a sprinkle a bit of this fairy dust, and a bit of this peptide, and a bit of this supplement, and maybe some red light, and I'm young again? I mean, it's quite mind-boggling, and I think that's where you know, good doctors that take, and there are some in the functional medicine and the health and longevity space are trying to formulate that, but I think as a whole, there isn't an exact protocol or guideline. We're kind of in the wild west of this, and in the very early days. But out of that, hopefully will come a uniform way that will obviously be individual, but also you know, improve your aging and your health. So I'll see what the rest of the panel has to say.
So I've been using 2 years around now on a daily basis, 1,000 milligrams of NMN. I up-doses my dose from 250 to 1,000 because now I have somebody who supplies me. He's a pharmacist and he manufactures NMN. Now I hesitate to do IV NAD because of the supposed some side effects, speeding heart rate. And also I've been using all year round 100 milligrams of ubiquinol, which is the better version of the coenzyme Q10. I'm not sure if spermidine helps with mitochondria, but I've been using also 10 milligrams of spermidine. I follow the fasting from dinner to breakfast, okay? The 12 hours fasting. I know it's not the 16/8, but you know, fasting with people who lift may sacrifice some muscle tissue, perhaps. And then also I use all year round metformin at low dose, okay? That also helps to lower your insulin resistance. That's all.
Let me just, so metformin, dihydroberberine, Elizabeth would chime in. Yeah, I mean, the Senolytics are awesome actually at helping to optimize mitochondria because again, the more free oxy radicals that we can remove, you know, from our cells and from our biology, the longer again and the leaner we're gonna be as we get older. But That's actually one that people underestimate is metformin and dihydroberberine. That actually helps because it suppresses systemic inflammation. So.
Well, it's funny with metformin on the mitochondria, you'll hear a lot of people say it's actually bad for mitochondrial health. And I think, well, what's the dose? Is it 3,000 milligrams a day or is it 500 or 1,000 milligrams a day? But it's interesting because of how powerful of a systemic inflammation squasher metformin is, it does actually improve mitochondrial health. And I'll just say, like, if you look at data, they keep doing studies and meta-analyses. Yes, same thing. Well, and the data keeps coming out about people live longer and healthier. And I think historically it was just looked at in diabetic people, and it's like, how can you evaluate, how healthy a diabetic person is going to be from taking metformin?
I mean, that's what's interesting, though, because they always say that if something doesn't have a patent on it, why spend the money? But you find examples like metformin where it is well researched. And so what other areas, there's also the SOG2 inhibitors as well that can be repurposed.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Which has huge anti-aging benefits. And one of the other areas that I think we'll talk about, and I think it somewhat touches on the mitochondria, but general health is a protein called Klotho. And I don't know, a lot of people have heard about Klotho, but you'll probably be hearing a lot more about it, and that has to do with both your kidney health and your overall healthy aging.
Stand if you're on Klotho.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I went to a Klotho conference virtually in San Diego. I was in the UK when I watched it. And one of the areas they're talking about is all these companies trying to develop Klotho treatments, either using mRNA to have your body make it, or using exogenous or recombinant version. But it's a very big, there's, I can't know, like 200 amino acids. It's a very complex protein which can unfold, and you don't want messed up, misfolded proteins in your body. So they haven't really cracked it yet. They thought maybe using fragments of it. But one of the takeaways I learned was on your blood markers, there's something, phosphate, if you ever do some panels. And I think phosphate also is how well your kidneys excrete it. And they did make a linkage that those who had the lower levels of phosphate, even slightly below the range, may actually have higher Klotho. And like all these things we're talking about, the mitochondria, Klotho, how do you measure? There needs to be biomarkers to know, otherwise you're just taking everything and you don't know what the outcome measure is other than how you feel.
For Klotho right now, there is somebody that's cracked the code, I can tell you that, and it's coming. But Klotho, there's nothing to measure it, but there are like kidney effects, renal globular. You can actually measure a person's abilities, filtration rates and whatnot before they start, and then look at it like 6, 12, 18 weeks later to see if there's an improvement. So that's kind of how they're measuring Klotho.
GH increases Klotho.
Yeah,
yes.
And so does pentoxifylline, so does SOG2 inhibitors like dapagliflozin and the other gliflozins, finerones. There's other medications that are used for the heart that people are taking already.
Yeah.
And that goes back to my point about repurposing old medications that we're taking already that traditionally people think, oh my God, I've got to take medicines. But some of these medicines are quite clever and they're longevity medicines, believe it or not. So you're actually, like with the metformin, are going to probably live longer taking these medications than, even if you're diabetic and taking these medications, than someone who's doesn't have diabetes and isn't on it. So I think we have to change the paradigm how we think about certain medicines. Then sometimes we demonize the pharmaceutical industry, but many times these things are will have a positive effect on our outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think everybody's made some awesome points, and I think we could all talk for hours about mitochondria, and there's so much to say. But for me, I'll just try to keep it short. I think mitochondria. I agree with Betsy that it's central to the aging process. And the mitochondria have been around for a very long time, and they do so much more than what we know. Not just the powerhouse of the cell, but they actually make melatonin in massive amounts. They make these other substances that people don't think about. And we get to the quantum biology level, it's all about energy flow, right? And it's about utilizing it. And I like to kind of tap into nature and kind of blend the old and the new, that ancient wisdom of getting out and looking at the sun every day, to getting your circadian rhythms on track. That sunlight does so much. When you ground, when you look at the sun, it's all about transmission of energy. And I think about mitochondria and our cells, the ATP, all this stuff. It's all about energy and making intracellular water, intracellular red light, et cetera, all these things that your body does at the cellular level. And like Betsy said, it's all about rotating things. So you want to utilize our body's inherent wisdom, the circadian rhythms, to tap into that. So things like, and again, a lot of my patients, I always try to start with the free, easy stuff or the cheap stuff. I mean, we could talk about expensive peptides all day, and I love them and I use them. But things like I said, grounding, like cold therapy, cold plunging, et cetera, is fantastic for similar to SS31, can help bridge those and stabilize cardiolipin and help with electron flow. Red light therapy, infrared light therapy is fantastic for mitochondrial health. And then, of course, doing things like fasting and simple, inexpensive supplements, CoQ10, PQQ, B vitamins, carnitine, different things like that people don't have to spend a lot of money on that can improve mitochondrial function. And then you can get into all the peptides, the MOD-SC, the SS31. And I agree with Dr. Yuruth in that it's about rotations, and you don't always want to be doing things and rotating, just like diet and workouts. We should be rotating things throughout the year. I've had a couple of patients that were doing all these mitochondrial peptides all at once, and then they got into trouble and they started feeling horrible. And I said, well, you're taking too much. There's a reason. You're doing SS31, MOD-SC, all these things all at once. I'm like, there's a rhythm to this, kind of like, a rhythm to our bodies. Our epigenetics is kind of kind of sped up so fast. We've advanced so far, but ancestrally, we're still on at a different playing field. Like we've evolved to again, why do people, animals and people hibernate during the winter, and then so there's different things. Whereas now we can eat anything we want all year round. That's not always a good idea, right? And that's a lot of things affecting these modern diseases and diabetes and insulin resistance. We should be rotating strategies. We should be doing more lower carb and fasting, less activity, more cold therapy during the winter, and then rotating that during the summer. Same with our peptides, same with our everything else. We should be rotating those strategies throughout the year. And then, of course, there's hormonal health, too. We talk about hormones, but there's still so much misunderstanding about thyroid therapy. And thyroid is intimately tied to mitochondrial health because thyroid acts at the cellular DNA level and is very intimately associated with mitochondrial health and mitochondrial function. So many people with Hashimoto's and autoimmune conditions, from leaky gut, from long-haul COVID, all these things, it's affecting everything, right? It's affecting the mitochondria, it's affecting their thyroid. So if you're not fixing their gut, fixing their thyroid, their mitochondria, you could throw all these peptides all you want, but you, just like with losing weight, you got to deal with the basics, right? The diet, the stress, the sleep, all these things before you get into the fancy peptides, etc. So there's a whole nother level to it. And again, if you tap into our ancient wisdom of using light and cold and circadian rhythms, you can do a lot before you even open your wallet. But all these things that we've been talking about are all fantastic, and they can work tremendously well. And if you improve your mitochondria, improve your energy flow, it's going to improve every other aspect of your cell and your tissues, and therefore your body.
I've got a little bit for you that I can add in. I think it's very simple by listening that you can see that mitochondria is of the utmost importance because of how deep everybody's going into it. I have had the privilege of studying under Elizabeth. I just got out of a class in Harvard, and her class taught me more, just so you know. That's why I don't think everybody understands how blessed you were to listen to her. We've all learned from her, but everybody up here is clearly an expert. Thankfully, I get to work with some of the best companies, and they all focus around the mitochondria. So I'm going to give you a three-pronged approach that goes along with what everybody talked about that I do. And I think it's important too, like Mike was talking about when we were introducing mitochondria, he brought up mitophagy and he brought up autophagy. So mitophagy is focusing on the mitochondria. Autophagy is the repair and recycling of cells that are either senescent, dying, and essentially what happens is, and you gave me a great thing in class when we were talking about this, about it like a garbage filling up and then overflowing with crap, right, that's inside of you, which then can empty out into your body, cause oxidative stress, free radicals, and we've got inflammation, we got disease, and we are headed to some bad things in our health, right? So we have to stop that. So urolithin A is one of the things that everybody's brought up. I work with a company called Timeline. They have a product called Mitopure. It's the purest form of urolithin A you can take. Urolithin A stimulates mitophagy, and I have just gotten a big panel of blood work done that shows my mitochondrial health, and it gives you a number, and it tells you how much. If your score is high, that means you need a lot of help. If it's low, it means you don't need any, and I scored a big 0, which means my mitochondrial health was phenomenal. Now I have other areas that need addressed, but mitochondrial health. So urolithin A is step 1 that I do. Step 2 that nobody brought up was telomeres, and telomeres that get shortened, that's what causes aging, and that's another thing that I've been blessed to learn about. And so we try to address that by stopping the telomere shortening, providing them protection. It's like a shoelace, and if it starts to fray, that's what happens to the telomeres. They become short, we age, we slowly die. George brought up fasting. And it's very difficult, like he said, when you train and when we're training so hard, it's hard because one, of the sacrifice of the muscle, but two, when you're training hard, you need fuel. You can't just starve and not eat. So what do? I have a company I work with that makes a fasting mimetic. Spermidine's one of the main ingredients in it, but it's something that I can utilize by training, and it's stimulating your body to be in a fasting state without actually being fasting. So it's a way around it. Another thing that got brought up was Jardiance. I actually am on Jardiance, and so I'm not going to get into too much detail on it, but Elizabeth and I are doing a big episode strictly focused on Jardiance. But some of these medications that were brought up, they have multitudes of benefits, and that's one of them, used for diabetes, also for ejection fraction and heart failure. So we'll get into all of that, but how it helps mitochondrial health as well. So it was hard for me to follow up on everything that everybody said, but that's a way that I go about it. Let me just tell you that mitochondria is basically, I would rank it in the top 1 or 2 on the most important aspects of our health and staying healthy. Being the powerhouse of the cell, providing that energy, you want to make sure that you're focused on every scenario you can on keeping them healthy. It's like all disease essentially start in your cells, and when those start to die, you start to die. So mitochondrial health, number 1, number 2, everything that everybody should focus on. I literally can't stress it enough. The more I've learned, the more I've been around, I realize and I know that's where it starts and ends.